There are moments in life when everything you built with discipline and hope suddenly collapses. Moments when failure feels louder than your dreams, when silence feels heavier than loss. We are taught to chase success, to measure our worth by victories. But no one prepares us for the quiet nights when doubt sits beside us and whispers that we are not enough. Yet what if failure is not the end of your story? What if it is the beginning of your transformation? This story will show you why true motivation is born in broken places, and why healing begins the moment you stop letting your past define you. In a small town wrapped between hills and long winter mornings, there lived a man named Arif. In the quiet town of Devpur, mornings arrived slowly. Mist hung low over the fields, and the world felt as though it had not yet decided what it wanted to become. In a small brick house at the edge of town lived Arif, a man who believed life was a race that must be won before sunset. He woke before the sun. He ran along empty roads. He wrote plans in notebooks no one else had seen. To others, he was disciplined, focused, different. But inside him lived a quiet fear, the fear of being ordinary. Arif had grown up watching men measure their worth by titles and income. Respect, he learned early, was given to those who achieved. And so he promised himself something simple: he would never be small. He believed motivation was something you forced into existence. That strength was built by ignoring pain. That failure was a sign of weakness, not a lesson. You may know this feeling. The hunger to prove yourself. The silent comparison. The belief that if you just work harder, you will finally deserve peace. Arif wanted success not just for comfort, but for identity. He wanted to look in the mirror and see proof that he mattered. Every evening, as the town quieted, he would stand by his window and stare at the distant city lights flickering beyond the hills. To him, they were not just lights. They were symbols of possibility, of escape, of purpose. He whispered to himself, "One day, they will know my name." And in that whisper lived both courage and fragility. Because when your self-worth depends on victory, you unknowingly declare war on failure. Arif did not yet understand that his journey was not about becoming known. It was about becoming whole. The first year was quiet. Arif rented a small, forgotten shop near the bus station, a place most people passed without noticing. The paint on the walls peeled like tired skin, and the windows carried the dust of many abandoned dreams. But Arif saw potential where others saw ruin. He worked with relentless discipline. He repaired what was broken. He studied late into the night. He turned the empty shop into a small design studio, offering branding services to local businesses. At first, only one client came. Then 2. Then 5. Word spread. The baker down the street praised his creativity. The pharmacy owner recommended him to a cousin in the city. Slowly, Devpur began to speak his name, not loudly, but with respect. With every small victory, his confidence grew. The notebooks filled with checkmarks. The mornings felt lighter. The mirror reflected someone who was becoming. You know this feeling, when effort finally begins to answer back. When the world seems to reward your courage. When motivation feels effortless because progress is visible. Arif expanded the studio. He hired 2 assistants. He bought better equipment. His income grew, but more importantly, so did his pride. He told himself it was earned. And it was. But something subtle began to shift. He stopped running in the mornings. He stopped sitting quietly at night. He stopped asking himself why he had started. Success became his oxygen. The praise from others filled him in ways discipline once had. He began to measure his peace by monthly revenue, his strength by public approval. He no longer feared being ordinary, he feared losing what he had built. And fear, when hidden beneath achievement, becomes fragile. From the outside, Arif looked unstoppable. From the inside, he was quietly tying his identity to something that could disappear. And life has a way of testing what we worship. It began with a phone call. Short. Polite. Unexpected. Arif's largest client, the one who had carried nearly half his revenue, was pulling out. Budget restructuring, they said. Nothing personal. But it felt personal. Within weeks, 2 smaller clients followed. Payments were delayed. Promises were postponed. The assistant he trusted most quietly accepted another job in the city. And then, like a sudden storm that gathers without warning, the numbers stopped making sense. Rent was due. Loans demanded attention. Savings thinned like winter sunlight. Arif told himself it was temporary. A rough month. A passing season. But seasons have a way of overstaying when we refuse to read the signs. One evening, he sat alone in the studio. The hum of the lights felt louder than usual. The walls that once reflected ambition now felt narrow, almost mocking. He opened his laptop and stared at the screen, not at work, but at the silence where opportunity used to live. Failure had arrived. Not dramatically. Not with shouting. But with absence. The town began whispering. Maybe he expanded too quickly. Maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe it was luck. Each whisper felt like a small stone added to his chest. When the final notice came, the one that forced him to close the studio, Arif did not cry. He simply stood in the empty room, hands in his pockets, staring at the faded outline where his company name once hung. The sign had been removed. The desks were gone. The lights were off. And in that darkness, he felt something deeper than financial loss. He felt erased. You see, when your identity is built on success, failure does not feel like an event. It feels like a verdict. As he locked the door for the last time, Arif whispered, "Who am I now?" The hills that once symbolized possibility now looked distant. Cold. His outer world had collapsed. And his inner world did not know how to stand without it. In the weeks that followed, Arif refused to say the word closed. When neighbors asked about the studio, he replied, "Just restructuring." When friends offered sympathy, he answered, "It's temporary." He clung to unfinished spreadsheets as if they were lifelines. Every morning, he opened his laptop at the kitchen table, pretending there were emails to answer. He revised old proposals. He redesigned logos no one had requested. Activity replaced acceptance. Inside, his mind replayed every decision like a courtroom trial. If only I hadn't expanded so quickly. If only I had chosen a different partner. If only I had been smarter. Guilt is heavy. But denial is heavier. He stopped meeting friends. He avoided the marketplace. He took longer routes home so he wouldn't pass the empty shop. At night, sleep refused to stay. He would stare at the ceiling and imagine alternative timelines, versions of himself who had succeeded, who had not failed, who were still admired. You may know this phase. The quiet obsession with rewriting the past. The refusal to grieve what is gone. The belief that letting go means admitting weakness. Arif's discipline, once his strength, became a cage. He forced routines without purpose. He punished himself with comparison. Social media became a mirror of everything he had lost, others expanding, launching, celebrating. Each scroll felt like salt on an invisible wound. His mother once knocked gently on his door and said, "It's okay to rest." But to Arif, rest felt like surrender. He believed that if he stopped moving, he would drown in the truth. And so he kept pretending. But pain does not disappear when ignored. It waits. It deepens. The more he resisted reality, the further he drifted from peace. He thought he was fighting failure. In truth, he was fighting himself. One late afternoon, Arif walked along the narrow lane by the river, shoulders hunched, mind heavy with numbers and what-ifs. The sun was low, painting the water gold, but he hardly noticed. He was too deep inside his own storm. At the corner of the lane sat an old carpenter, his hands worn like folded maps, carving a small wooden bird. The man's shop smelled of cedar and dust, and the rhythm of his tools was gentle, almost meditative. Arif paused, drawn by the quiet purpose in the old man's work. "Beautiful," Arif muttered, though he rarely complimented anything these days. The old man looked up, eyes soft but sharp. "Thank you," he said. "But it wasn't always like this. I've broken many pieces before this one became a bird." Arif frowned, curious despite himself. "Broken pieces?" The carpenter chuckled, tapping the wood. "Yes. Pieces that seemed useless. Cracked, splintered. I kept trying. Every time, I learned a little more about the shape, the grain, the strength hidden inside." Arif stared at the small bird. It was perfect in its simplicity, yet he could sense the history of failure embedded in its form. "Sometimes," the carpenter said, "people think failure is the end. But really, it's a guide. It shows what to let go of, what to rebuild, and where patience is needed. You cannot rush growth, or fear will guide your hands." Arif felt something stir, a quiet recognition. For the first time in weeks, he was not running from his thoughts. He was listening. "You speak as if you've done this many times," he said quietly. "I have," the carpenter smiled. "And each time I fail, I discover a piece of myself I didn't know existed. Failure is not your enemy. It's your teacher. Only those who respect it can truly rebuild." The words settled in Arif's chest. They were simple, yet they carried weight deeper than any spreadsheet, any client, any accolade. And in that moment, he realized, the end of his business was not the end of him. For the first time, he allowed himself to wonder, not about success, but about who he could become. The days after the carpenter's words were quiet, almost invisible. Arif did not announce change. He did not seek applause. He simply began. He started by walking through the town again, noticing what he had ignored. The old bakery, the library, the park where children swung with laughter, small worlds that had existed even while he had been consumed by loss. He began helping where he could. A friend needed help with a flyer, another with a small repair. He offered his time, not for recognition, but because it felt light. Healing, he realized, often comes in the smallest acts. Each evening, he sat by the river, not thinking of plans or profits, but listening. Watching the water flow, the sun descend, the birds return home. He learned patience again, the way one learns to breathe after almost drowning. Arif returned to his notebooks, but differently now. He wrote ideas without pressure, sketches without expectation. Discipline remained, but it no longer carried fear. Instead, it carried quiet strength, a willingness to try, to fail, to grow. He apologized to himself for the harsh words he had whispered in the nights of despair. For the guilt, the obsession, the endless comparisons. He forgave the failures, and in forgiving, he felt a small, remarkable freedom. You may have felt this too, the first release after a long struggle. A moment when your chest feels lighter, your thoughts slower, your heart capable of quiet hope. Arif learned to value small victories, a conversation, a smile, a project completed without expectation. He discovered that transformation was not a thunderous event. It was gradual, subtle, patient. And with every small step, he let go a little more of the identity tied to success. By the time winter softened into spring, Arif no longer feared the emptiness he once dreaded. He knew now that purpose was not a title. It was a state of being, steady, humble, and alive. For the first time, he felt motivated not by recognition, but by the journey itself. And that, he realized, was a strength no failure could take away. Years passed, though Arif did not count them in calendars or client contracts. He measured them in mornings he rose without dread, in conversations that nourished instead of stressed, in quiet victories that required no applause. He reopened a studio, but this time it was different. Smaller. Simpler. Not a monument to ambition, but a space for learning, for creation, for patience. He hired no assistants at first. Instead, he mentored a few young minds who reminded him of his own hunger years ago. The town watched quietly, some still skeptical, some curious. Ariv no longer sought approval. The praise that once filled him with pride now felt like wind against the skin, noticed, but unnecessary. He walked the river every evening, carrying a small sketchbook, jotting ideas, observing life's subtle rhythms. The hills he once saw as distant goals now felt like companions, steady and unwavering. Success no longer defined him. Failure no longer frightened him. Each setback he had endured had carved patience and humility into his bones. Each mistake had taught him courage and resilience. Ariv understood that discipline was not just about effort. It was about consistency without attachment, action without ego. Healing was not about erasing the past, but embracing it. And purpose was not a destination, but a quiet awakening to one's own values and truth. One morning, a client asked him how he had managed to rebuild so steadily. Ariv smiled, holding a freshly carved wooden ornament like the ones he had admired long ago. "I did not rebuild for them," he said softly. "I rebuilt for myself. Because failure does not define you. Only you do." In that moment, the town saw a different man. Not one chasing recognition or trophies, but one who carried peace and strength in equal measure. And Ariv felt it too, the calm, the balance, the quiet joy of someone who had walked through fire and emerged not just alive, but whole. He had discovered the true dawn, the one that rises within, long before the sun lights the sky. And now, let us pause for a moment and consider the quiet truths Ariv discovered, truths that can guide anyone willing to listen. First, failure does not define you. It is not a verdict on your worth, but a lesson on your path. When we stop identifying ourselves with outcomes, we find freedom. Second, healing begins in acceptance. Denial may feel protective, but it only prolongs suffering. Letting go opens the doors to growth. Third, discipline is not the enemy of peace. True discipline is steady, patient, and humble. It does not demand recognition, it simply nurtures strength over time. Fourth, purpose is found, not forced. It arises when we align action with values, not applause. It emerges quietly, often after struggle and reflection. Fifth, motivation is a companion, not a master. Motivation guides, but persistence and patience carry you through long nights and setbacks. Sixth, small steps are transformative. Healing, growth, and courage rarely arrive all at once. They arrive in the subtle, consistent choices we make each day. Seventh, wisdom can come from unexpected places. A stranger, a child, a quiet voice, listen. Simple truths often carry the heaviest lessons. Finally, rebirth is possible at any stage. No matter how far you've fallen, there is always a chance to rebuild, not bigger, but wiser, stronger, more at peace. So, remember this, failure is a teacher, not a sentence. Let go of what no longer serves you. Embrace small steps. Trust the journey. And above all, carry hope, courage, and strength wherever you walk. Ariv's story is not unique, it is a mirror for every one of us. Take it as an invitation to rise again, to rebuild, to rediscover yourself. And when you do, share your light with the world, because someone, somewhere, is waiting to see that transformation reflected back to them. The sun rises, not just in the sky, but within you. End of story.